The John Lebang Show has been known to make people laugh, sing, think, scream, throw things in rage, and generally lose their minds. Listener discretion is advised.
Worldwide and out to the greater universe, you're listening to the John Lebang Show.
Greetings, Earthlings, and alert the media. John Lebang is here with my good friend, Derek Shelmerdine, and we're talking the best front men and women of all time. Derek, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, John. It's great to be talking to you again, mate.
And what an amazing subject we have before us.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody could have predicted the results. I mean, really are some outstanding wins, and a lot of it was so close.
And for the people that don't know, you and I came up with a list of 32 of the best vocalists that we thought, and then we left it up to the listeners to choose and pick and choose through the brackets until we get to the final two. And we're going to talk about all these amazing frontmen tonight.
Interesting to see that three of them are actually members of the 27 Club. What we'll do is we'll go through it in reverse order, basically, and have a look at the people who didn't make it past the first round. And the first one of those actually was Ozzy Osbourne, lost out to Alice Cooper.
That was amazing because it was going both ways. Ozzy just didn't have enough, but man, he had a lot of votes.
But I do love the fact that, I mean, they've been around, a lot of these guys have been around a long time before they actually found fame. I mean, Ozzy was in a band called Rare Breed with Geezer Butler, and they then joined the Polka Tulk Blues Band. Now, what a great name for a band.
Right, and that was around 1968.
That's right, yeah. And then they became Earth before becoming Black Sabbath. They did their first gig as Black Sabbath on the 27th of September 1969. And he was with them through until the end of 1978. So he had a heck of a good innings, I think, with Black Sabbath. But
and then he went solo after that.
That's right. He formed the Blizzard of Oz, and with Randy Rhoads, who sadly died tragically in a sort of prank that went wrong. He was in a light aircraft, and they buzzed the caravan that Ozzy was in. They were on tour, and unfortunately, the pilot either clipped the caravan or clipped the ground, and it was all over.
Ozzy has a weird taste in diet, doesn't he?
I mean, talking of frontmen, I mean, this guy is the guy who famously bit off the head of a bat live on stage. And what happened? That was on the 20th of January 1982 at Des Moines in Iowa. And what happened? Somebody threw a bat onto the stage. He thought it was a rubber bat, so he just picked it up and bit the head off. Only to discover that it wasn't. The bat took a dim view of this and bit him back.
Right, he had to have rabies shots.
That's right. So he had a few shots as the tour continued.
I mean, when we look back at the matchup between him and Cooper, that could have went either way.
Oh, absolutely. And like a lot of these matchups, the lead kept changing over because they were so close to 50-50. It was often that people came up from behind and snatched it at the end, which is pretty much what Alice Cooper did.
Exactly. Now, Ozzy's on tour, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's all over the place from the 30th of January through to the end of July next year. You can find him if you're around in Ireland, the UK, Germany, Sweden, Finland, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, Austria, and then he's heading all points south to New Zealand before he comes to the USA via Japan. So he's really going to be out and about next year.
And another great frontman was Kiss with Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. And they had an early matchup and didn't fare so well.
That's right. They were against Ronnie James Dio, and he won fairly convincingly on that particular one. But what a great band!
Yeah, and for two frontmen, one of the few in this large group of great frontmen that was carried by two people.
That's right. I mean, the whole makeup thing, I think, really sort of worked for them. And the names, I mean, Gene Simmons liked to call themselves Demon, and Paul Stanley liked to think of himself as Starchild. I mean, they were both together back in the very early 70s in a band called Wicked Lester before they got together and formed Kiss. Did their first gig around the beginning of 1973.
For their first gig as Kiss, they rented a big old limo just to show up and act like they were big stars already.
That's right. I mean, there's nothing like, if you're going to be a rock and roll star, letting people know that you are a rock and roll star, I think.
Right, and they did lose pretty handily because they only got 44 or 42% of the vote to Ronnie James Dio, which we'll get to a little bit later here. But Kiss is on tour.
This is another one of those goodbye tours. They're calling this one the End of the Road World Tour, and they really are all over the place. Right across next year, from the end of January to the beginning of December, you can find them in Canada, USA, Germany, Sweden, Finland, Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Czech Republic, Belgium, Netherlands, Norway, Italy, Sweden, Germany. They managed to get to the UK before going over to Australia and rounding up in New Zealand.
Now, if people can't keep up with all the tour dates, they can go to your website, rock'n'rollunraveled.com, and click on the link for this show.
Absolutely. It gives what it is, the links are actually to the 90% are to the website of the band. They're not to ticket agencies. So what it does, it's the band's own tour site. And the link, as you say, is on my website, and it just shoots you straight across, and you can see the dates and the venues. And in fact, on the website for all the other previous shows, John, all the people who are on the road that we've talked about for the last year or so, you can find their dates as well. So if you like gigs, it's a good place to check out who's going where.
Because the group has more than one front man. Which one did you like better? Were you a Paul Stanley fan or were you a Gene Simmons fan?
I'm probably more of a Gene Simmons fan, I think.
Yeah, he had the heavier music. Paul Stanley's a little more glammy.
Gene Simmons is one of these guys that's sort of packed with personality, I think.
Speaking of personality, now we're moving on to our next matchup. And this was probably one of the best of the first round. And that was Jimi Hendrix versus Angus Young, Bon Scott, and Brian Johnson, the AC/DC frontmen.
And surprisingly, well, not necessarily surprisingly, but Jimi Hendrix lost out. I mean, somebody had to lose. I mean, that was one heck of a matchup, and Jimmy came off slightly worse.
Yeah, and that would have changed a lot of things later on down the road if Jimmy had won.
But I think probably what it could be is people would often think more of Jimi Hendrix, I think, as a solo artist.
And a guitar player. And I think if this was straight-up guitar player, he might have beat Angus straight up.
Oh, I think he probably would. But it's worth just mentioning when we're talking about frontmen here, we decided to take a little bit of latitude and recognise that Angus, Bon Scott or Brian Johnson would be the frontman, and you wouldn't really think of the guitarist as being there. But with a number of these bands, what we decided to do was to actually take people who present themselves very much to the audience, which is why some of these have 2 or 3 people involved, like Kiss and AC/DC. And I think that was a good decision, actually, because I think that sometimes some people in bands get a little bit overlooked because they're not technically the singer. And I think it's good to bring to the fore some of the other people who are very much what the band's all about.
Especially in the case of AC/DC, where you have the guitar player who really is the image of the band, even though the singer is the front man. So that's why you combine stuff like that. That's why you combine Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley and some of the other things that the other groups we're going to get to a little bit later on. But Jimmy, he goes way back.
Well, absolutely. He was in his first band back in 1958, the Velvet Tones. Playing acoustic guitar, and then he was in another band, couple of bands maybe, before he went in the army. And he was actually in the 101st Airborne for a year or so. You know, the guys that were the band of brothers from the middle of 61 to 62. And he formed a band while he was in that. But when he came out, he spent good 3-4 years working very, very hard in America and getting no recognition at all. Sort of in 1963, he was in Little Richard's backing band. And one of the sort of urban myths that you come across is that one of the reasons he got kicked out of Little Richard's band was because he was taking too much of the limelight. So he was playing his guitar with his teeth, even back in those days.
And you can't compete with Little Richard.
Oh, I mean, another unbelievable performer. But Jimi Hendrix's problems all stem back to the fact that he signed a contract in October 65 with a guy called Ed Chalpin. And it was sort of after that, 66, when the Animals, the British R&B band, was splitting up. And they actually played their final gigs on a tour of America. And Chas Chandler, the bass player of the Animals, he decided that he'd move into artist management and have a change from being a musician. And he saw Hendrix at the Café War, and this is September 66, or it'd be Augustish probably when he first saw him. But he persuaded Jimi Hendrix to come over to the UK, and they formed the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and found immediate success in the UK. And it was when we talked about this, when we talked about Monterey in June of 67, that was when Jimi Hendrix really cracked the American market. But what's great about that is if you look at the posters for the Monterey festival itself, it says, "From England, The Who," and next to it, "From England, the Jimi Hendrix Experience." I always thought that was quite a nice touch. Definitely. But I mean, he's one of the 27 Club. Obviously, he died in 1970 at the age of 27.
Yeah, no touring for him, unfortunately.
No, sadly not.
But yeah, I mean, with Jimi Hendrix's rich career and how great of a guitar player he was, there's no doubt that he was one of the best to make this 32. And you know, it wasn't very easy, as you know, Derek, to put this 32, because there was a lot of... I've had people say, well, why didn't you put this person in? Why didn't you put that person in? And it was difficult to narrow it down to 32. We could have had 132, Derek.
Oh, without a doubt. I've had exactly the same conversations with people, and they're quite valid as well. I mean, there are a lot of people who score very high in these sort of polls that, you know, we didn't put in, because you've got to start somewhere. And I think we did choose an interesting mix, quite an eclectic mix, some of the guys that we are going to talk about aren't usually associated with these sort of polls, but I think there's really good reasons why they made it into our poll.
Yeah, we covered every style of rock music, even the fringes we're into the punk and as far as the commercial rock was concerned. And then when they were broken down into the brackets, they were kind of broken down into these subcategories, subgenres, so they had to kind of play out of their little grouping before they got to where it was more a wide-ranging variety of frontmen.
Absolutely. Some did very, very well as well. I mean, there's one particular, when we come to him, that I think did astoundingly well.
Our next one we're going to talk about, Stevie Ray Vaughan versus David Coverdale. Now, this has a little blues side to it because both guys kind of come from the blues rock background. Stevie Ray Vaughan didn't do so well.
No, sadly, he didn't. But He's probably not as well known as David Coverdale, and again, he's probably more of a virtuoso. I mean, it was his band Double Trouble, and I think it was their first album, Texas Flood, about middle of 1983, where he got some decent acclaim for that.